turns out there is a
That's
common
cool.
denominators of those shapes, which is the equilateral triangle, and that's
Yeah.
what the grid ended up being. Which now in the upcoming expansion, I will use that exact grids to create the lakes in the game. But I didn't
Cool.
know that until the game was almost finished. Like I at some point I was playing, I was like, huh.
Welcome to Cardboard Creations, where we discuss the process, techniques, and inspiration for designing board games. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I'm thrilled to be here today with David Chircop to find out how Hamlet the village building game was created. But first, let's jump into a brief overview of how Hamlet works. Hamlet is a competitive village building game where 1 to 4 players are communally turning their small village into a bustling little town. During the game, players construct buildings that everyone can use to create materials, refine resources, earn money, and make important deliveries to construct the village's big landmark, the church. The game features irregular shaped tiles that connect together without a grid to form a village that is completely different every time. The tile placement organically creates interconnecting paths that the villagers use to transport resources across the village with a network of donkeys. Although everyone is building the same village, the winner of the game is the player who earns the most points by being the biggest contributor to the growth of the village. Hi David, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is great to have you. So I remember at Essen last year, 2022, every time I went by the Mighty Boards, your booth, it was completely packed, and like every table demoing Hamlet was just like slammed, and it seemed like a real like one of the most like popular games I saw at this show. And I was so curious to try it. I didn't even get a chance to demo it there because your booth was so busy. But I finally got to play it, and I like it a lot. Like it's got like roads and boats vibes to it, but it's also has this like nice blend of being very pleasant but puzzly. You know, there's a decent amount of player interaction, and it just looks cool on the table as you like build this village with all these unique tiles. So I got to know, like, what initially inspired you to create Hamlet?
Yeah, it comes from kind of my formation as a gamer, really, when I was much younger and playing a lot of like real time strategy video games on my computer when I was a kid,
Nice.
and I remember I always used to play the village building parts of it, and then when the combat starts to happen, I usually used to just delete the game and start over because I only
Yeah.
liked the part where you're building houses and you're
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
the little workers running from one side to another carrying stuff and the networks that they build, and one of them in particular, it was called the settlers in Europe. I think it was called something different in the US. Maybe it was called Surf City or something like this. I don't know, but in Europe it was called the settlers, and there's a whole series of these, and this one was particularly cool because it had the route building. It had these roads that you needed to kind of place down, and they form. So there was a lot of cool stuff about this formation, this growth of a village, this organic growth of a village. The whole thing is it forms on its own based on, oh, there's a forest here, we should put the woodcutter next to the forest, right? And then, oh, okay, we need to now put the sawmill close to where the woodcutter is so that it doesn't take very long for them to walk from the woodcutter to the sawmill, and also my personal growing up, and the places I grew up in, here in Malta. Villages are very small, roads are quite windy, and they're all kind of built in this sense of community. And there's a lot of senses of community in the villages, and they're all kind of sort of built through necessity. Kind of, the village I live in now was kind of halfway between the main city and the more restful areas of the island. And so it became a hub where people were meeting, and so it turned and slowly turned into a town. And there was a lot of churches brought cities together many times. So, for instance, in the history of where I live today, there were 3 or 4 small villages which chipped in together enough money to build a massive church, and then they became a single village through that, right? And before they
Wow.
were just 4 separate communities with different names and different identities, and the communal sort of making enough money together to build our
Yeah.
church, and
Yeah.
then that that feeling of ownership of the church, which persists still till today in our culture, right? There's a lot of connection, not just in a religious way, but also from
Sure.
a cultural perspective. A lot of people focus a lot on the community aspect that this brings, and there's a lot of people that raise money for the feasts and raise money for the cultural events
Wow.
that the
Cool.
church kind of sort of organizes. It's just a it's different, I think, from what we see on TV, on what kind of churches represent.
Right.
They're not just in the more kind of US kind of centered
Sure.
stuff.
Sure.
It's not just a community or a conglomeration or about the religion itself, but many times the church in Malta is the foundation of the town.
Wow.
It is what
Cool.
made the thing a village, and it is what brings people together into cooperating long enough to be able to actually do anything useful. Hamlet means a small village
Awesome.
without a church. And that's kind of the point of it. You need to finish this central building, be it what it may, to create a sense of community. So it's these two things coming together, right? The network building, the feeling of a place, the sense of place coming together because of necessities of of rock formations, necessities of where the forest is, and so you need to be there. So certain things, if they're far from each other, there's going to be repercussions, or maybe that you want them to be far from each other. And Hannah tries very hard to try to bring these elements out, these sense of place, plus the sense of community, where we're all trying to reach a central goal, but really and
Sure.
truly, we all want our families to be the richest and to have
Right.
the most food and to be, this sense of like we're helping each other, but at the same time, we're still looking out for our own sake.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
communities exist a lot in Malta. The gossip that goes on, but we're still really friends. I have my own little business. I still want to be. I'm helping the community. I'm giving to the community, but still kind of sort of looking after my own
Sure.
self.
Sure.
Not in a destructive way. It's just the way the economy works. But that is also a thing that's trying to come out in Hamlet. So the interaction is kind of cool there because of that, right?
That's
It's
awesome.
kind of like give and take.
That's awesome. So how did you go from that initial inspiration of like these video games that you played that inspired you and actually your like village that you grew, your hometown that you grew up in to like a like a playable prototype?
I went through, I think, 5 or 6 different versions of this game that I call Hamlet. Many of them had different mechanics that were very different than this one. Some of them were roll and writes. Some of them were not even roll and writes, more like the network drawing the roads. You know how the
Yeah,
roads
yeah,
form,
yeah,
like drawing them
yeah.
by hand.
Yep.
There was one which was like a tetromino, 3D tetromino building thing where you need to form a specific shape to construct that building, and then you need to build roads from thing to another, and that was cool as well. But none of them really managed to work as well as this version that we published, the one that was a lot more about these tiles and senses of place kind of thing. Before we before I gave it some structure, this version of Hamlet was actually made out of, like, you would play on a set limited area. It had like a fence, and each building was a different size based on how much space it took in your village. And there
Gotcha.
was no currency. There was no, like, the balancing was based on how much space it takes in your village. So if you're going to build bigger buildings, you're going to have less space for buildings, and that was kind of the balancing of it all.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
then road building became extremely fiddly to do, because it was all, you place them anywhere you want, and then I need to somehow come up with a system that worked to
Hmm.
connect things together. And I worked on that for a very long time, and then eventually I realized that I needed to give it a little, give some order to this chaos, and slowly I started creating maybe more ordered things that kind of hide the fact that there is some order. In fact, Hamlet nowadays is based on a triangular, on a small triangular grid. That's where all the different shapes come from. But that's not that. I didn't realize there was a grid. Like all I was trying to do is trying to create some order with shapes. And
Yeah.
so, so I basically combined a hexagon and a triangle, and I put them together in different ways to create different shapes. Turns out there is a
That's
common
cool.
denominators of those shapes, which is the equilateral triangle. And that's
Yeah.
what the grid ended up being, which now in the upcoming expansion, I will use that exact grids to create the lakes in the game. But I didn't
Cool.
know that until the game was almost finished. Like I at some point I was playing, I was like, huh. um,
That's awesome.
but yeah, the point was create some order to this chaos. The grid is supposed to fade away, right? The game is there is some order in those shapes, but it's not meant to feel like you're playing on a grid. It's meant to feel like
Right.
these things don't match very well,
Right,
and they're kind of
right.
going their own way, and they're forcing you to play in ways that you wouldn't, and
Yeah,
that's kind of the
absolutely.
point, because that's how these villages are formed where I'm from.
Right. Right, right. Oh, that's awesome. So, how much playtesting was done, and like, what's your playtesting process like?
For Hamlet, we did quite a bit of playtesting. A lot of the playtesting was done online in the later stages, but we also at Mighty Boards we have basically 5 groups across the world in different regions in the world. We have good connections to universities, as mm, my business partner Gordon, dear friend, is a professor at the university here in Malta, and he's written books about games and video games. So we have, thanks to that, we have connections to the university and to other universities that are students who are studying game design, students who
Cool.
are studying game analysis. And so through that, we've built small communities across the world, right? And then
Awesome.
eventually, after we've tested that enough with those people, we tested with our Discord community online quite a bit, and the local communities in Malta. That whole period was almost a year, but the last 6 months were the most intense, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. How do you consolidate like the feedback you're getting from these different playtesting sessions?
Huh. So we gather feedback on two kind of levels.
Okay.
We do a round of playtesting for data collection, and then a round of playtesting for more kind of sort of qualitative data. Sorry, which is more like how much did you like the game, which part did you like the most, and they're all forms. The first one is for balancing and for making sure that everything is on point. So just for data collection, so that we can refer back and we just have a big matrix of how long the games took, how many turns they took, on which turn this happened, on which turn that happened, and then we analyze that and crunch the numbers. And then on the other hand, we have the different type of testing, which is a lot more, as I said, qualitative, which is that is, with interviews and stuff like this, it's a lot more about kind of sort of feeling out what people are trying to say. Many times but people don't say exactly what they mean, or they can't put what they feel onto words, and it's about figuring out what it is, the granularity of it. So but that also comes from our background, from our academic background, where qualitative research is a big part of
Gotcha.
what we've done in the past. So we're pretty good at weeding those things out, right?
Oh, cool. Yeah.
But there's a lot of that happens as well.
Cool, cool. So, at what point did you start like writing the rules and like documenting the rules for Hamlet?
At the point that I need people who are far away to, but whenever I need someone to look at it and I'm not there,
Yeah.
then the rules need to come out, right? Of course, the first version is absolutely terrible and has a lot of gaps and holes in it. But yeah, the iteration is long. And with Hamlet is particularly interesting when it comes to rulebook, because it's a simple game. It's not complicated once you get it, but
Right,
it does have some weird things. It does have some things that aren't, it's not. You can't say it's a worker placement game, because it's not really a worker placement game.
right.
You can't say it's a route building game, because it doesn't work the same way as other route building games. So, and the segments and how they work, and the donkeys and how they work, very simple, but they're a bit different, so
Right,
it's not as easy as it is with other Euro games, to kind of sort of bring
right.
bring that out. The game also has that feeling of being simple, but then it's a little bit crunchy. It's a little bit puzzly.
Sure.
The rules are simple once you understand them, and then the actions are very simple. But then it's actually there's a little bit of depth in there. It's not by any means a heavy game,
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably in the medium or
Right.
entry level
Right.
medium. So also bringing that together and presenting it in an approachable way it wasn't super easy. But yeah, I started writing the rulebook as soon as I needed to show the game to someone else, basically, which was
Cool.
very early on.
Yeah, it's definitely a game that, like, yeah, once you know how to play, it feels very simple and snappy to kind of like your turns are fast, and just the tough part is figuring out like how you want to like make this, like, solve this logistics puzzle, like how you want to be efficient to do this and that, to get this resource here to there and everything like that, which is really cool. So, what would you say was like your biggest challenge as you were designing and developing Hamlet with your team?
So I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think in general, I think it's a very interesting challenge that many different designers have solved in many different ways. It's the interaction between a sense of place and movement. Movement in particular is a very difficult thing to get right in board games due to a number of different things. One, we have an inbred, a deeply not inbred, that's the wrong word, cut that out, a deeply ingrained.
Grain, there we go. Well, bread has grain too, so.
Yeah. A deeply ingrained hatred, I think, for movement in board games because of roll and move and what that represents for us board gamers, and how much
Right.
we despise that part of gaming history,
Right.
and so yeah, movement in general is a tough thing to do in board games because it's either like move one or move two, which are both extremely boring,
Right.
or just move however you want. But then once you do move however long you want, then you've completely reduced the point of movement because you can just go anywhere, right? So
Right.
so it's but then usually in games like these where what you want to do is do an action, right? So if there's distance, then I want to do that action. If it's just going to mean that I'm going to move two, do nothing, move two, do nothing, move two, get to where I want to, yay, I can do my action. That's not very very satisfying either,
Right.
right? The movement in itself is not
Right.
particularly satisfying. And different games have done different things too. Like worker placement in some way is a representation of movement, a representation
Mm-hmm.
of place. And
Sure.
sometimes there's this is distance is mapped in this way. So games where you can only take the action that's adjacent, for instance, that's a representation of place through worker placement.
Gotcha.
Istanbul, for instance, did it in an interesting way where you're dropping off merchants and then trying to collect them again and restricting
Right.
movement in that way. These are all ways how designers are trying to create a sense of place or a sense of movement without making it boring.
Yeah.
And for Hamlet, solving that, keeping sense of place while not making it just methodical and kind of sort of mathematical
Right.
was a very tough thing to do. And the eventual solution that I came up with was separating the different types of movement on different levels. That's why originally there weren't donkeys. It used to be that the workers were the same worker was the thing that moved stuff around, and also the thing that took actions, right? But separating those two and making it so actions can just be taken by the workers while keeping the movement and the route building on a separate token. That's what allowed me to have a sense of place while also having simplicity and snappiness of actions. So on your turn, you do the thing you want to do, and you don't
Yeah.
move and wait to do the thing you want to do, or it doesn't block you from doing the things you want to do. Also, similar systems like in other games where there is some sort of restriction on where you can get to can become quite difficult in Hamlet because the restrictions come from other players' actions, right? So then it's too much restriction. If other players are blocking you from taking actions because they've
Right.
taken the stuff you need, then also having a movement restriction becomes too many restrictions
Yeah.
for you to be able to plan is just a step too far. So that's completely abstracted and simplified. You go wherever you want. The
Right.
things that are holding you back and restricting you are the availability of the resources and what
Right.
other players did in the previous rounds. And then the movement of resources that your network is placed onto something else. Also, it allowed me to put donkeys in the game, which is always a good thing.
Totally. Totally. So besides like figuring out how that movement was going to work, did you have any other like aha moments when you were designing Hamlet?
I think the other big one was the tiles, like figuring out those shapes and coming to a thing that felt like weird shapes, but at the same time was still had some order. We talked about this a little bit before.
Right.
I think those were the two kind of big ones. I struggled with what shapes, how this is going to work for a long time, and when I found that was an aha moment, and then I had another one when the donkeys came in. I think those were the two key big ones. Yeah.
Cool. After you play the game, the village starts really small and then it evolves in this unique shape and you have these pretty tiles. How are the art and graphic design decisions made?
The weird tiles made it very difficult for us to do graphic design for this game.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the art is quite detailed and beautiful, trying to be reminiscent of these video games that it's trying to represent. Right, it's
Mhm.
top down kind of sort of village that's forming on its own. That's that all that. Is also quite rich. So it was very it wasn't easy to blend those two things and make it work, especially since roads are going in different directions. We had did a lot of development in terms of like how are we going to like some of the information in Hamlet is in the paintings and some of the information is on icons, right?
Mm.
How do we try
Yep.
to balance those two? We
Yeah.
can't make the art too washed out and too kind of sort of unrepresentative because there's information there that's important, and also a part of the tactile and visual enjoyment of the game is the formation of a thing that's quite congruent in some sort of way, shape, or form, and the
Yeah.
roads that manage to continue, and all of that, and the little stories that you can see on the tiles when you're holding them in your hand.
Right,
Also,
right.
another big thing is if you look at a Hamlet tile, there's information that you only look at when it's in your hand, and information that you keep looking at when it's placed onto the board, right? So there's two
Mm.
levels of how you interact with the tile. It's like, okay, I don't need this information here once I've placed it, so I only need to look at it like this, whilst the
Right.
other stuff needs to be visible on the board.
Yeah.
So some of the things we did, for instance, we offloaded icons off of the board and onto the physical components themselves, so that we printed icons on them, so that when a thing is on the board, you can see it and you can see the icon printed on it. Still,
Yeah.
because it's quite busy, it can get a little bit hard to see, but that was extremely difficult to solve, and we iterated on that quite a bit on how are you going to mark what is on a building, and because
Yeah.
you can't have them all in order like a worker placement game, like next to each other, right? Because
Right.
where it is going to change every game. That's the point of
Right.
Hamlet, right? uh,
Yeah.
so having the resources on the board separated as a separate layer above the tile, that allows it to be there, and also elevates the icons a little bit upwards. That was one thing that we did. Also, because of the different shapes of the tiles themselves are quite big as far as board game tiles go, but the iconography on it, because of the triangles, for instance, that allows a very small amount of space for you to be able to actually place text and place iconography.
Yeah.
That again, and then also if you start enlarging the iconography, then you start hiding the art underneath, some of which is roads, which you need to be able to see to be able
Right.
to play the game, right? So this took the best part of 4 months for us to start bringing
Dial it
all of
in.
those things together,
Wow.
of scrapping and trying again. What we came up with, I think, was the best we could. Probably
Mm-hmm.
now,
Yeah.
maybe we could iterate and do better, but it was much harder than
Challenge.
any other game that we've done in the past. Much harder, like at least 6, 7 times harder than like my previous game, Petrichor, for instance, to get the UI kind of right,
Yeah.
and we can still probably improve on that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. You're dealing with those odd shaped tiles. And that it seems like super hard to balance, like, hey, we need to be able to see the art, but we also need to be able to see the graphic design and everything. So when and how did you come up with the name Hamlet Village Building Game?
So that was very, very early on. I think it was like 6 years ago. And I was David Turci, a fellow designer and dear friend, was visiting me when I was living in Poland, and I showed him this kind of village. I want to make a village building game. I really want to
Yeah.
do this, and he's like, and I think he just said the name. He's like, oh, you know what would be a really cool name for this? Hamlet. I'm like, oh my god, he was. I still have like these little videos that you play in your head of a specific moment in your life.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still I still can see. I can still remember him standing behind the sofa, saying like, with his face like excited about the name, and
I
I'm
can
like,
picture
oh
that
my
face.
god, yeah, yeah, oh my god, that's perfect. Yes, yes, yes. And the name just stuck on day one.
That's
From when I
awesome.
showed the game to, it was a completely different game, by the way. It wasn't this game at all. It was a
Right,
completely
but
different
the
village
name.
building game that I scrapped since. But yeah, in that version, everyone built their own little village. It was completely different concept, but
Awesome.
yeah, but it was still called Hamlet. And then I made
That's cool.
three other or four other Hamlets since.
Very cool. Very cool. So, at what point did you know, like, hey, this game is finished or like ready to be produced or ready to go onto Kickstarter or for crowdfunding?
Oh man, that's such a tough question. Like you never know. You don't. You just don't. You could go on forever. Seriously. Like this is one of the hardest things to do. Many times the reasons why I say that's it. Let's not develop it anymore is usually a financial reason or a scheduling reason or Essen is coming and when and we have to
Yeah,
have it there or we can't miss Gen Con or whatever.
right.
Usually at that point it becomes that because otherwise you keep going. And I think a lot of artists have this problem with whatever they're trying to do. Is this ready or is it not? You can just keep going forever. And with games and iterating, it's just more testing. More, is it enough? Is it ready? Does it feel good enough?
Right.
At some point, you run out of time, and that's when the game is ready. I think. Whether we've managed to get it to the right place or not, then it's like, yeah, you've run out of time, you've run out of money.
Yeah.
It is what
Time
it
to
is.
time to get
Uh,
it out there. Get it out there
yeah,
in the
it's
world.
you have to get it out there. Yeah. Um,
Cool. So, David, do you have any advice for anybody, like an aspiring game designer who's interested in creating a board game that has like a decent amount of player interaction?
okay. I mean, games with player interaction are great. There's many different types. I make a specific type. For instance, I'm very bad at social deduction games. I'm bad at making them and playing them. That's a specific type of player interaction. But mine is mechanical player interaction, right, where players are affecting each other in a specific way. These type of games, I think I just like those type of games, and I have a knack with imagining how people interact with each other. But also one thing about them is that they kind of split the room. You know what I mean? Some people don't like that.
Yeah.
Some people do.
Yeah.
Some people are not comfortable with interaction. So try to keep it relatively nice if possible if you want it to be successful, I guess. And also remember, I think one thing that I realized as I made games about player and which have a lot of player interaction in them. Um, when we make as designers, when we create games that have player interaction, we are not actually creating games. We are, well, at least the game we're delivering to the players, it is not finished. It only becomes finished once you add the players in, right? Because they are such an important part of the game. Like,
Yeah.
and it's with multiplayer solitaire games, maybe the game, not 90% of the game is already in the box. With a game like Hamlet, more like 40% or 50% of the game is in the box. The rest is what the players do with it, with this framework that you create
Yeah.
for them to exist in. Um,
Yeah.
and that does mean that different groups are going to have slightly different experiences, and you need to be, be aware of those different experiences, what they are, and try to classify them and think about them and create ways in the game to at least be able to push them, those type of experiences, into at least some sort of control. Because if 50% of the players is if 50% of the game is the players, then imagine what happens if you change half the game every single time. How
Right.
different is it going to be, right? And that's the biggest thing. So you need to create systems that are not rigid, not super rigid, but also allow for emergent changes, emergent stories, emergent, like
Right.
this. The beauty of player interaction, right? Make use of these things that are so hard to get with more scripted, more easily parsable, more replicatable games. And yeah, then just embrace it and lean into it, and this is what you've made. Like, in some way the game is going to take over at some point and do what it wants to do, not you. When you create
Right.
systems like these, sandboxes like these, you can't have full control of it, and you need to be okay with that, because it's the players who are going to change your game.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's some sound advice. So, it's been really awesome talking to you today, David. As always, I really like you're like hearing the backstory and like your inspiration for creating Hamlet, the village building game, was like really cool. I never even expected like, I didn't know that that's how like some of these villages kind of develop, and it makes the game even more special, kind of hearing that that's where the inspiration came from, like your real life experience and everything. But is there anything else like coming down the pike for Hamlet, or anything else you're working on that you'd like to mention?
Well, we have Hamlet by the Lake. I made a sticker for it, actually. I have one on the. We have. I just made these because I
Nice.
was I was creating prototypes to send out. Yeah, Hamlet by the Lake is the new expansion for Hamlet, and it's not
Cool.
out yet. We're doing a Kickstarter for it, but it adds lakes, of course. Hamlet by the Lake.
Nice.
Basically, if you've played Hamlet, you know that there's sometimes gaps that form between buildings, like little holes.
Mm-hmm.
Those become lakes. You fill them with triangular tiles that I have thin prototypes, like triangular tiles like these,
Oh
that you
yeah,
fill
yeah.
in, and those become lakes. And in these lakes you can go fishing, and when you go fishing you can use those fish for special abilities. You can sell them for money, or you can cook them into meals that give you one-time abilities.
Oh,
And also
cool.
in the lakes you can put boats, and then
Oh,
you get to put like a little flag of your color on the boat to make it like a sail of
that's
your color.
awesome.
um,
How
and that
adorable.
lake becomes like a swimming donkey, basically, for you. So you'll be the only one able to cross that lake with
Oh,
resources and
cool.
with your villagers. So this is another way. Before we talked about control, this is
Yeah,
another way of adding a little bit more control. Like, as a player, you can create secluded kind of sections of the village if you
yeah,
play your tiles and build it in the right way. And it's still,
right.
it goes back to, let's build in a necessitative way. Like how are these villages formed? This person built this hut across from the lake where he only owns a boat, so that they can be the only one who can, have
Right,
monopoly on the planks,
right,
because the
right.
plank place is there. That's what it's kind of trying to do. And so it gives
Neat.
players a little bit more control. If you build the village right, then you can actually give a certain part of the village, make it only
Cool.
accessible to yourself, unless the other players play around and build roads around to try to reach the other. There's other ways. So I think it really heightens, one, it's cute. Two, it
Yes.
heightens the sense of place for the village, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes the strategy up a notch. So yeah, I'm really happy with what we're doing here. And these are the fish that you can.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really cool. Really cool. Awesome. Well, again, it was great talking to you, David, today. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you all for watching Cardboard Creations. Hopefully, it's been as inspiring and fascinating for you as it has been for me. And remember, the only way to get something done is to start doing it. Boom.